Hi, good morning. I wanted to just give all of us a reminder that we never know who's our messenger. I've gotten answers to questions in the most unlikely sources. It even could be a commercial. It could be as simple as a commercial on television. Or somebody says something relating to something entirely different, which was exactly the message that I needed to receive at exactly that moment. So it's about awareness. It's about paying attention. And recently, I've been getting lots of hits, lots of reminders that to pay attention. And all alerts are on. Pay attention. As I mentioned before, I like to read in between sleep number 1 and sleep number 2. Biphasal or bimodal sleeping patterns. Waking up, sleeping for a while, waking up, reading for me, and then sleep again in the early mornings. And it seems the best sleep comes in the second sleep, the early mornings. And my first sleep, a lot of times it's interrupted by receiving, by inspiration, by getting a message about either my next step in life, heads up to be aware, watch carefully, or it could be directly related to these videos, giving me a new topic, starting with always first is the name. Names always come first to me, and the rest is kind of a follow-up. So naming something has always been really important to me. Naming a business, for instance, if you have a business venture, for me, the name starts to solidify the process. So anyway, the other night, I was in between sleeps, and I was reading my most recent science fiction on my trusty iPod. And I came across a word I want to share with you, a new word for me, simulacrum. Simulacrum. And I'll have to read it to you. Means likeness, similarity. It's a representation or imitation of a person or thing. The word was first recorded in the English language in the late 16th century, used to describe a representation such as a statue, a painting, especially of a god. By the late 19th century, it had gathered a secondary association of inferiority, an image without the substance or the qualities of the original. Philosopher Frederick Jameson offers photorealism as an example of artistic simulacrum, where a painting is sometimes created by copying a photograph that is itself a copy of the real. I want to read a little bit about the history of the word because it's captivated me. A simulacrum has long been of interest to philosophers. In his Sophist, Plato speaks of two kinds of image making. The first is a faithful reproduction, attempted to copy precisely the original. The second is intentionally distorted in order to make the copy appear correct to viewers. He gives example of Greek statuary, which was crafted on the larger on top than the bottom, so the viewers on the ground would see it correctly. If they could view it in scale, they would realize it was malformed. The example from visual arts serves as a metaphor for the philosophical arts and tendencies of some philosophers to distort truth so that it appears accurate unless viewed from the proper angle. Nietzsche addressed the concept of simulacrum in The Twilight of the Idols, suggesting that most philosophers, by ignoring the reliable input of their senses and resorting to the constructs of language and reason, arrive at a distorted copy of reality. Postmodernist French social theorist Jean Ballarat argues that the simulacrum is not a copy of the real, but becomes truth in its own right, the hyperreal, where Plato saw two types of representations, faithful and intentionally distorted. Baudrillard sees four: basic reflection of reality, perversion of reality, pretense of reality, where there is no model, and simulacrum, which bears no relation to any reality whatsoever. So this led me to some reflection about, once again, reality. And the definition I was reading to you of simulacrum implies that there is a real reality and then a reality that is less than a real reality. Well, any reality that we perceive through the senses, through the faculty of our minds, as we all know, are equally unreal, equal in their non-sharing of the truth, of real reality. And yes, there is such a thing. But this has to be experience rather than determined through sensory input. The experience of reality, accepting the oneness, looking past duality. All events on the sometimes rocky road to awakening. But it brought to me something of this transition, a personal observation of how I've responded to my transition from first leaving the ego behind and secondly dealing with the more insidious ego, what I call, and what others have called before me, spiritual ego. And this was much more elusive and much more difficult to not only see, but to ultimately dismiss, put it in the garbage bin. So I'm thinking of my traditional understanding of the duality, sacred and profane. And remembering that in my process of self-examination, I wanted to celebrate the sacred and put the rest of it, the profane, to rest. And this indeed was part of my 30-year experiment with Raja Yoga, the yoga of strict discipline, the yoga aimed at conquering the mind through stilling it, quieting it to stillness, and being rewarded by clarity. And as we all know by now, these things have been elusive, to put it mildly, for me. I do get glimpses of clarity, very, very brief. Just like bliss, I do experience bliss, but it's in that quiet time between breaths, the pause of breathing in and breathing out. And it's seductive. Bliss, which leads to ecstasy, is very seductive. But where I encountered problems is, number one, it was always fleeting. Bliss in the ecstasy perhaps is a realm yet explored by me. But I'm no stranger to brief glimpses of bliss. But I do know, whereas equanimity, my reward for the consequence, just the same, reward consequence of jhana yoga, of going through the process of ideas, information, ideas, knowledge, and with the blossoming of wisdom. The state of mind, equanimity. For most parts, it's been a state of mind that, for most parts and most times, it's a state of mind that I can reside in constantly. Although there has been moments or periods of time when I've failed to fully embrace all aspects of equanimity. But it was the consequence of discarding Raja Yoga, the yoga that's most familiar to the Western peoples, the Western seekers, all the way to yoga of physical positions, to taming the mind, quieting the mind, conquering breathing, using mantras to enforce, to incubate. How's that word? I love it. Incubate the conditions necessary to beginning quieting stillness and clarity. After 30 years, I accepted failure, accepted defeat, that no matter how strict disciplinarian I was, how self-inflicted my concepts became, the reward just wasn't forthcoming. So, obviously, the first thing that would, if I mentioned sacred and the profane, that's a duality, each representing opposite. But when we saw simulacrum, the idea to turn this on its head, with the profane becoming sacred, and the sacred at the same time becoming profane. And I realized that, at this point, I realized that in my own practice, when I was dealing with the preparation necessary to grasp, even though it's not like physical grasp, to experience non-duality, to reconcile the opposites, as I've said before, diametrically opposed, it seems, in this process. And as a consequence of this, for me, it didn't mean that dualities disappeared, even though I reconcile via understanding the cosmic joke that two apparently opposite polarities could be equally correct at any given moment. So, understanding this, again, understanding pain's experience through, well, I can only say it was a gift, penetrating this veil of apparent duality was an inspiration, a gift from the great beyond. But as I said, dualities didn't disappear from me. As long as I'm in the physical form, conditional love has grown in me exponentially. Conditional love. But conditional love exists on another plane, another level, and it doesn't dismiss, it doesn't eliminate for me the mundane, the moods of the personality, to be able to experience love, to be able to experience, and I'm talking about personal love, love for my wife, love for my kitty, this personal love. At the same time, experiencing, or in this, not at the same time, but also being able to see when there's times that it's appropriate, is that too strong a word? It's okay to be angry. It's okay. Basically, everything or anything is okay. Especially with the mandate of small doses. Unconditional love has no limits, but the personal, sense-derived emotions and thoughts and actions experienced on a purely physical level all indeed have a place, just as personality survives any transition. You're still you, no matter what, like it or not. Find out for yourself. You'll still be you. Any grand illusions, closer to any grand delusions, have you thought of yourself of attaining some spiritual level of of your actions. So find out for yourself. I know that along with all the changes that come with recognizing what is, there just might be more sameness than change. You might just find that you are more than who your personality has led you to believe will be there no matter what happens until this physical body withers and dies. But what I was noticing, very interesting, in lines with the simulacrum, simultaneous is in there, isn't it? That this intentional reversal, an intentional skewing of what's accepted as reality would lead to a perception of greater reality. But more important, I was interested in the transition that it started out any reproduction or image of a God and worthy there of respect and at times worship, and to turn that on its head so that what was sacred becomes profane is what led me to today's talk, because I realized in my celebration of ordinariness, in my elevation of ordinariness to the supra-ordinary, was an attempt at explaining this switch. Everything that before was sacred, my efforts, my practice of Raja Yoga, my attempts to even my scaled back attempts, giving up on control, emptiness, my attempts to tame the mind while maintaining the usefulness in my pursuit of jnana yoga, the path of knowledge, of wisdom. You need that faculty. But decision-making, actions towards the world, these should be scrutinized. In fact, I was gifted, I think, with a reluctance to make an impact on the world, or attempt to make an impact upon the world around me. And when you think about it, talk about egoistic, that anything that I could do could make any kind of impact, much less a lasting impact on anything or anyone, is hilarious. But it doesn't prevent people from attempting and even rewarding and respecting people who had at least some success in this arena. Instead, would wait and let the world come to me. And I don't know if this was foresight, if this was something I'd learned from previous lifetimes. Who knows, and really, who cares? I just knew that it's how inherently, naturally, I dealt with the world around me. wait and see. Be prepared to act, of course. There's no laziness involved in this. There's nothing about not caring. It's paying attention. And recently, I need to be more careful. Yeah. And what is careful unless other than attention and awareness to the moment around you? Devoting full faculties to that moment in awareness. It's careful, isn't it? Be careful. Be aware. And I noticed that in my celebration of ordinariness, what I was really getting at was really trying to, or in the process of doing, or being, better yet, and becoming, especially, particularly, what had always been sacred to me. It started with switching yogic paths, switching the karma yogic path from diligent, disciplined, self-deprecating, self-denial of necessary for Raja Yoga into what had indeed always been my forte, using my mind in this process of self-awakening, using my mind for self-evaluation. And in the process of doing that, everything that I had held sacred, the discipline, the denial, and the profane to me was almost letting me be the I am, letting me be what I am, which previously had been the parts of the profane, was a profanity for me to accept or let me be. I always thought I should try harder, be better. And my self-evaluation was coming up failure. How can you work so hard with laser focus for 30 years only to realize that it was getting you nowhere? Instead of now here. So my sacred and profane was turned head over heels. And it took me until just the other night, until I just read the simulacrum, just read this new vocabulary and went and did the research that I shared with you earlier. It's only then that I became aware that indeed I had taken this duality and flipped it. The profane had become the sacred. It took me a long time to realize that this had happened. And I started wondering, right now I'm in the process of wondering, what other things I've flipped? I've mentioned to you that for me, obviously, dualities didn't disappear, even though I recognize the inherent fallacy of seeing things as more than one. But now I see that it might just be, well, it is, a tool in this never-ending process of evolution. And it was not easy for me to get it, to get this, to see this. Only that embracing the ordinary felt correct. And taking all the specialness out of the sacred and putting it in the profane. And profane in the sense of everyday, ordinary life. So now I will spend some time, some reflection, some examination of this recently realized phenomenon and look for similar trends among other dualities that I continue to entertain as a tool to a better and better understanding of the events that have transpired for me. It's one thing to recognize, and trust me, when this big event turns out to be on a much less grander scale than you had imagined, in a much different avenue, with much different results than you ever entertained prior to this event. But it's on such a cosmic level, and all the while, as cosmic as you can get, we're still reduced to this common denominator for the time being of being in this physical form. So I became really aware. I'm in the process of becoming more aware that dualities, even though despite me recognizing the myth, the mistake, there's still something within concepts of duality that represent opportunities for me to continue my expansion.